So now we begin our panel discussion. We're going to talk about the electrification of personal transportation, your car, and specifically about charging those electric cars. And to guide us through the discussion, we have Dan Wolf over here of Cape Air. To tell you a little bit about him. Everybody's really modest, so I get the pleasure of kind of going through their bios. Daniel, an American entrepreneur, aircraft pilot, politician. In 1989, he focused the Cape Cod-based airline Cape Air, which originally flew only Provincetown and Boston into Massachusetts, and has since expanded internationally. Really? That is so exciting, huh? There you go. And in 2010, he was elected to the Massachusetts Senate to represent, of course, the Cape and Islands, so perfectly. He ran unopposed in 2012, was reelected in 2014, and during his tenure, he has emerged as a progressive leader in the Senate, advocating for renewable energy, perfect for this forum, increased minimum wage, and universal health care. Thank you for being here, Dan. Next is Stephen Tupper. He's Deputy Director of the Cape Cod Commission, and as the Commission Director, he oversees multidisciplinary team working on initiatives in the area of transportation, climate change, and infrastructure development. Stephen has a bachelor and a master's of science in civil and environmental engineering and is a registered professional engineer. And we have Sean Tully here. He's the manager of electric mobility at Eversource. He is the manager there for the past 6 years. He has implemented the company's EV Make Ready program for Massachusetts businesses, which has expanded in scope and in the last 2 years included the very important rebates for Massachusetts residents and Connecticut residents and businesses. Previous to this role, Sean was primarily responsible for providing consulting services and utility energy service contracts under Eversource's GSA area-wide contract. Last but not least, Tom Cahir, our administrator for the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority. You're getting the point, we can't go anywhere without these guys, okay? Nowhere. Mr. Cahir began his political journey in 1985 as the Massachusetts House of Representatives, serving for 14 years before transitioning to the executive branch. Noteworthy for his leadership in transportation, he spearheaded initiatives like commuter rail expansion and significant legislative efforts. Thank you so much, Mr. Cahir. Now the administrator of the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority, Cahir continues his commitment to public service, transportation, improvement, and environmental stewardship. A lot of words from me about these guys. I said to Dan, let's start with you guys just taking the mic down the line and just give us one phrase on what you want to be known about and known for. That way it'll stick in the minds of these folks, and then you guys go on and be electric.
Thank you, Rondella. We have not done, you and I have not done enough that you would possibly know that nobody can hand me a mic and expect to get one sentence. So having said that, I'm going to pass the mic to Steve, and then it's going to come back to me because I'm the moderator. I'm going to give a couple introductory words when it comes back to me. So, Steve?
I guess we'll let you do that as moderator privilege here. So I'll start off. I'll just say vision. I think it's important to envision the future you want as a region, and I enjoy working to try to get towards that vision. So I know we'll talk a little bit about that today.
So I guess we'll take it from vision, and I'm really the operations group. I help bring these solutions to our customers, both for public charging. I really believe, and I'll talk a little bit about here today about, residential charging and the public DC fast network. One, you're going to do the majority of your charging in, and one is really important in public perception and adoption of electric vehicles. So really, I want to come to a point of education and bringing these solutions to our customers to help with this this transition of transportation to electrification.
Thank you, Sean. And I sort of oversee the transportation system on Cape Cod. And, for the last several years, we've been transitioning over from fossil fuel vehicles to electric vehicles and learning as we go and getting guidance from smart people and professionals. So I'll be speaking a little bit about what the Cape Cod RTA is doing.
Thanks. And just real quick, we have an amazing opportunity here on Cape Cod. When I look around the room, if you all look around the room and see who's here, and it's not only the positions they fill, but it's who they are as people. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of the leaders here, Christy at the Cape Cod Commission, John Cox at the college, Paul, you and I have worked in a lot of different capacities together. We have a lot of town councilors here from the town of Barnstable. We have real leadership on Cape Cod here. I know that there is an opportunity generationally to speak to future generations by what we're doing here at the Big Blue in this today and tomorrow. So we have just an awesome opportunity. And I would just, like you talked about vision, Steve, I think we really need to be thinking ambitiously and in a visionary way. A little bit of personal stuff. Walking into this hangar, I haven't walked into this hangar in 30 years. And so I had a little bit of a meltdown because Cape Air did start here 30 years ago, or actually 35 years ago. I learned to fly out of this hangar in 1978 and 1979, where I got my commercial license. So coming back in here has been a little bit of a journey for me. When we started the airline, there were some people just starting to talk about climate change. I think the year 1989 was when the end of, it was the book that Bill, End of Nature, came out the same year we started flying scheduled service at Cape Air. And as the airline has grown, we have become more and more aware and conscious of the impact that we're having on the environment and the impact that we've had on climate change. So as an airline, we started almost 10 years ago to have conversations about electrifying what we do. And that technology is emerging. It's emerging slower than anyone would want, but we are getting there. This airport, and I could, who here has ever heard of Harold Friedman? Ben Jones? Doc Mosby? I mean, yeah. I am mentioning, I'm going back 6 airport managers, and we are so fortunate at this airport, in this facility, that Katie Service is the airport manager here, because Katie is emerging as a national leader in how an airport becomes a model for sustainability and a model for really leading us into the future of air transportation, and also how to be a good neighbor as an airport manager. And so I think it's really exciting that we're here today. Where Cape Air started, that's the past, but where Katie and her team is going to take us in the future with the help of everybody in the room here. So that having all been said, we sort of have talked a little bit about what would be interesting to the group here. We're going to go down the line and talk a little bit about what each of the individuals and the organizations they represent are doing relative to the EV movement that's going on and how the Cape is going to actually get to that 2050 goal, not only as far as the infrastructure required, but as far as what each of the organizations represented here, what our role is going to be, and what our vision is going to be. Has anybody here, who here has heard of the island of Samso Island in Denmark? Okay, so everybody needs to write down Samso Island, and I want you to write it down, and I want you to go online and look at what that island has accomplished in the last 20 years. The country of Denmark, about 20 years ago, initiated a competition, and they solicited bids from different communities around Denmark as far as ambitious, forward-looking goals around energy, and they got a lot of bids, and the winner was Samso Island. And Samso, in the last 20 years, has reinvented itself around energy, everything from transportation to domestic to how they do energy. And one of the things I've said the last few years here is, let's look at the Cape and Islands as being the Samso Island of the United States, as being the Samso Island of Massachusetts, because we have the opportunity here, from transportation to how we do our building, to how we manage our lives, both to create the energy here, to distribute it, and to use it in ways that can really resonate across the country and around the world. So my ambitious challenge is, let's be the Samso Island of the United States here. And that really, and you're going to talk a little bit, Steve, about the percentage of our carbon footprint that is transportation here on the Cape. It's significant, and that's really why we're focused on the EV movement here. I did drive today here in an all-electric car, which, to the infrastructure question, 2 nights ago when I was charging it, I blew out the main circuit to my house, which it so happens if I have my car plugged in and I forget to turn the amperage down from 48 to 30, I see nodding heads, so others have had this problem. And if the washing machine goes on at the same time that a refrigerator kicks on, it actually blows the main circuit to my house. So we actually have to manage that. But it shows you that everybody, every of these pieces of these infrastructure, whether it's at our home or the big picture, there are limits, and we have to deal with those limits and manage around them. and then plan for a bright and exciting future. So Steve, to you, and then down the line.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you for setting up that concept of that really big vision and then getting stuck in some of those really minutiae items that are going to be a challenge to get there. So what I'd like to do is set a little bit of context in terms of where we are as a region in the electrification transition. We certainly heard from Eversource about some of the big challenges, some of the infrastructure upgrades that are coming in the future years, and it was interesting to see how much of that is associated with the electrification of the transportation system. So I want to start by talking a little context in terms of the numbers. Certainly as the regional planning agency, we start with the data, want to understand the Cape Cod context so we can really be strategic about the investments we're making. So we'll start looking at all the cars on Cape Cod. So there's about 233,000 vehicles registered on Cape Cod. Of that, about 220,000 are fossil fuel vehicles, gas, diesel, internal combustion engine vehicles, ICE, usually in this term here. So you can see still a vast majority of our fleet is gas powered. Beyond that, there's 9,000 that are hybrid. Again, still powered by fossil fuels, a little more efficient. So the section that we're really interested in here are the last two categories. That would be the electrified vehicles. Composed of plug-in hybrids. So those are vehicles that can run in gas, but if you can plug it in, you can do some all-electric driving as well. Certainly a bridge technology in some respects, but we've had a lot of attention on that recently. And certainly for a lot of trip purposes, you can see value in that, where your daily commute can be done with electric power and then use the gas beyond that. So that was about 1,500 vehicles on Cape Cod. Electric vehicles, all electric vehicles on Cape Cod, we're at 1,800. So you can still see we're still very early in the curve in terms of adopting electric vehicles. So we're not seeing those demand issues yet, but we are going to get there. You can just simply look at some of the other states that are further along. California is certainly the leading example there. Last year, 25% of new vehicles purchased were electric. So you can see we're well behind the curve there. But if we're talking about infrastructure investments that are going to take years, decades, we have to start making those strategic decisions now to make sure that we're ready for that demand. And of course, Cape Cod's different than many other places. We've heard that in a couple respects today. But that's particularly true when you're talking about EV charging demand. I know Sean's going to talk about some of the details there, but the vast majority happens at home. But for a lot of the visitors to our region, they don't have that home base. So we have to think about what is that public charging network that they're going to rely on when they come here, when they come to Cape Cod. We want to make sure we're a place that is welcoming to those electric vehicles, because beyond Cape Cod, there are many more of those out there. If you just simply look about 200 miles from Cape Cod, there's around 150 to 250,000 electric vehicles that could be making the trip here, and then they're going to need a place to charge when they get here. So understanding those demands and understanding how we can be strategic in building out that infrastructure is a really important challenge for our region. It's important for us to think about it now, importantly because there's funding available now. So we're in the infancy of this technology in some respects, and the federal government, the state government is putting up money to build out that infrastructure. If as a region we identified this early in the wastewater problem, we would have been in a little bit different place than we are right now. We're dealing with it much later on the progression. So I'd love to see us tackle electrification early on when those resources are available so we can do it in a much more cost-effective manner. And we have a long ways to go. So if you think about those DC fast charging, which Sean's going to talk about a little bit, those really high-speed charging locations, right now there's about 7 stations on Cape Cod for all of the Cape, and certainly some geographic issues. We'll have about 9 more coming on in the next year, so we still have a good amount of work to do there. Certainly there are other places where lower power charging, level 2, where it can take a couple hours to get a reasonable charge, still has an important place in this conversation. And certainly an important place when you're thinking about trying to hit multiple goals. So if you're thinking about those chargings, you want to think about where people are going to be parked for a couple of hours. And you want to think about the economy, think about economic development. You want to be putting those in places where people want to be and where we want to encourage people to spend some time, like our downtown areas, like our community activity centers. So we want to both be strategic in going after the funding, but also thinking about those investments that reinforce the community that we want to see in the future. So certainly there's plenty of opportunity in the coming years, but certainly it's going to take many of us around the table here to work on that. I want to give one more specific example of some of the use cases here that are important. Thinking about our visitors, I want to highlight the hotel and accommodation industry. Certainly that's an industry that has been adopting this technology really out of demand. They're seeing that from their consumer. But on the Cape, we have about 4% of our hotels have charging right now. That's well below the state and national average, and something that I know we've been talking to the Chamber about making some strides to improve. But a good example of where we have some unique demand here on Cape Cod, we want to make sure we're strategic in going after those resources. So that kind of paints the big picture of where we are in Cape Cod very early on, but an important time to get many folks involved to make sure we can develop this charging network that we need as a region. So certainly we'll come back to some more specifics, but I know a couple of important partners here moving down would be Eversource in terms of implementation, and Tom has some great examples of what the RTA is doing, so with that I'll pass the mic down.
Great, thanks, Stephen. So my work at Eversource, and working in energy efficiency and specifically in electric mobility, we bring a lot of these programs, these incentives to our customers, but I'm really in the business. I mean, I work for a utility, but I'm really in the business of market transformation. Eversource and the Mass Save PAs have done this for a long time in commercial buildings, and now we're really moving our focus to decarbonization. And I got started in switching from working on traditional energy efficiency to electric vehicles back in 2018. And at that point, we got an order from our regulators to help out with this transition. So we had a public-facing site host program where we're looking for commercial industrial customers to operate as site hosts, to have publicly available chargers to help instill range confidence in the folks in the Commonwealth and back up that adoption curve of electric vehicles. So that was originally intended to be a 5-year plan to roll out the implementation. We had that program fully subscribed and mostly built out in 3 years. That didn't happen by accident. It happened through folks like Dan and Tom. They were very early adopters in this program and help getting this infrastructure out there. And we're looking for more. We now have that first plan was $55 million. Now that's grown. The authorization for Eversource, just Eversource, is almost $200 million over the next 4 years through 2026. So we're actively looking for not only commercial industrial customers to increase that, but also light duty fleets, medium heavy duty fleets, and residences. So we really need, Eversource needs your help to really build out what is really a real estate infrastructure asset to help support all of the electric vehicles that Stephen was talking about. We have a lot of people that are going to be coming onto the Cape on the on-season, looking for charging as they come across the bridges, and then looking for charging, when they go to their accommodations for their various places they're coming on vacation and doing business here on the Cape. So that's going to be really important to think about. As Lavelle was talking about earlier, 70% of the load growth, in southeastern Massachusetts is going to be from electric vehicles, based on the modeling that his team is doing of the needs of the electric system. So we're going to have to. It's going to have to be a multi-pronged approach to really take a look at this. And the majority of a lot of folks in here, we're going to do a lot of the charging at home. 85% of the charging you're going to be able to do at home. But there is the public infrastructure network, both DC fast and public level 2, is going to be very important. Especially as we're switching from a summer peaking to a winter peaking system. So when you enroll in these programs, I mean, so this is going to help inform some managed charging programs to really help your neighbors, help your businesses in the area electrify quicker. If you have a street, everybody puts in a level 2 charger, 40 amp or 48 amp charger. Every person on that street installs a level 2 charger. That's like adding another house or two to that street, and this all starts to back up to some of the infrastructure assets that Lavelle was talking about earlier. But we're really starting to imagine and ponder some of these programs and really look at very specific ways that we can do demand response in these managed charging programs. Traditionally, demand response really targeted the ISO system peak, so that peak time and really working with large commercial customers to do that peak shaving, to really have a lot of savings for ratepayers on that demand reduction at those peak times. As we get into electric vehicles now offers us an opportunity to have a closer relationship with our customers, and every one of us in here can really take part in that demand response, and not targeting that ISO system peak, but really looking at the localized system constraints as the utilities continue to build out this infrastructure to march towards that 2050 goal. So certainly in southeastern Massachusetts, there might be, imagining, programs where, there are some charging done at home, or encouraging people to do more of that charging earlier in the day, in the evenings, and that way when we get to the peak early in the mornings, we say, okay, if you have enough charge to get to work, and there's charging stations available at work, there might be incentives and programs available for folks to charge at work, or some places they're going around during the day. So the other piece of this too, and this is where it really, you think about the electric vehicle charging, infrastructure really now is where the cell phone industry was 15, 20 years ago, where, you had some towers, you go drive a spot, you drop, or you're roaming or something like that. And now, by and large, everybody's cell phone works everywhere. There's unlimited data, unlimited minutes. You don't have to wait until 9 o'clock to make all the phone calls you want to make. And it's a great piece of technology, just like electric vehicles are, because there's that real estate infrastructure asset that really is behind there. So, one of the things in continuing to work with customers, talk to customers about transition to electric vehicles, it's not only just having some place to charge at home, having some place to charge at work, but the perception, even though it's going to be a minimal amount of charging that you're going to do, the public DC fast network is really, the perception is, until that really gets stood up and is widespread and reliable, that's going to be the big piece, for folks to be able to adopt electric vehicles, so they can be assured if they're driving from Connecticut or from New York State or Maine, and they're coming down to the Cape for the summer, they know that there's going to be some place that they can charge reliably, when they come down here for business or pleasure. So that's really my focus over the next few years through 2026, and then we're going to have another iteration of this plan. But really looking forward to working with all of you and developing this and being strategic and very deliberate, so we can find a way to really instill that range confidence in folks, and encourage people when they're at a time to make that next car choice. They're looking for not a plug-in hybrid, they're looking for a full battery electric vehicle.
Thank you, Sean. Like my dear friend Dan Wolf, I drove over here in an electric vehicle too, a Chevy Bolt. But unlike Dan, in my efforts to advocate for electric vehicles, I don't tell people their houses, the fuses are going to blow up, the washing machines are going to... I say, there are chargers out there that are just easily, efficiently put into your car. Anyway, so as was said earlier, I'm the administrator for the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority, and as a transportation leader on the Cape, we meet as a team every week and talk about things that we should be considering. And I've been around for a while now, so several years ago, we talked about the importance of reading the greenhouse gas emissions numbers on Cape Cod as opposed to the Commonwealth. I think at the time it was 40% transportation in the Commonwealth and 55% on Cape Cod. And that told us right then and there that we need to be aggressive and serious about trying to do something about this. So obviously transitioning from fossil fuel vehicles, and we have 140 vehicles that traverse the Cape every single day. We did a very aggressive marketing effort, trying to tell people that even if we have fossil fuel vehicles, getting into public transportation is going to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So Kathy Jensen from our staff is here. She led that effort to educate the citizenry on that important matter. But we did procure the services of a nationally renowned consultant called Hatch Associates. And my other good friend, Stephanie Spadoni back there, she led our charge from our office on the selection committee to identify a company that could really guide us and help us, because we were all somewhat ignorant in terms of what we should be thinking. So at the time, to Stephanie's credit, there were 3 or 4 very competent companies around that were being considered, and the one we chose wasn't the one that I initially thought we should. I had familiarity with the others, but not this one. Stephanie convinced me that Hatch Associates was the way to go. They're from Pennsylvania. They've got a tremendous reputation. I looked into the stuff, and they are very good, and they were very good. We were very ambitious with our efforts. We said we want this study done in 10 months. which they did, and we did a monthly newsletter, and I encourage you all to look at our website. It's ZEV Journey on our website, and it tells you, see the newsletter from each month, but also the deliverables were done in a timely fashion, very informative. So we were all being educated as we went along. We tried to think of other things that we needed to do, so I contacted John Cox, the president of Cape Cod Community College, and to try to find out what the students there are learning, because we were ambitious with our efforts. We wanted to transition over to EVs fully by 2035 or so, and we still have an aggressive time frame. But, you know, there are challenges, you know, supply chain issues. There's a lot of issues that we still need to learn more about. I talked to the folks at the Voc School in Bourne and at Cape Tech. We went for a tour of the Cape Tech. We saw what the students were learning so that they could have meaningful, high-paying jobs upon graduation to work on these important batteries and other apparatus that's within the electric vehicle. So we've done a lot of good stuff in preparation, but we do, like Sean said, we have a long way to go. We went and partnered, and Dan spoke of the leadership on the Cape, which is admirable, but we also have collaborations all over the Cape, particularly with our multimodal folks. You know, the Steamship Authority, Cape Air, KD Service, Plymouth and Brockton, you know, Peter Pan, Highline. We communicate very regularly to see about opportunities to create cooperative improvements through the transportation system. We have 400 square miles we're responsible for, roughly. And so the journey's been informative and exciting. We now have, we have 20 level 2 charging stations at our site and 10 down at our operations center in Dennis. And we've got more coming in, and we've got level 3s under discussion for a faster charge. I'm not as smart as you, Sean, on that stuff, but I know that's what we're heading for, because you're right. And I met with Paul Niedzwiecki and others a month or two ago about, in that 4% number that Steve referenced, you know, people want to come to the Cape. It's a tourist destination, but if they have an electric vehicle and they're coming from wherever, they want to know if they can stay in a hotel or an Airbnb and have adequate charging to get to where they need to go. So that's a serious matter. And now that we have 10 going on 20 electric vehicles in our service now, we have this new system that we're going to unveil on June 22nd. It's called Smart Dart, and it's an app-based service where you can summon one of our vehicles. We'll come and get you within 35 minutes and take you anywhere you need to go within your town, within your individual town, 15 towns. So that's going to be a game-changing, exciting new element that we're introducing. But what's good about that is the electric vehicles, where we're still concerned a little bit about range, and we put a lot of miles on these vehicles. We want to make sure that within those towns, you know, we can handle the load. And we also have longer services, our fixed route services, 7 of them that go over all 15 Cape communities. And it's going to require en route charging. And we've talked with the commission when I talked about our multimodal partners. Obviously, Steve is someone we talk to every week because he's been a leader, really a great leader on the Cape in regard to all of these issues. So we're learning as we go, but I think we're ahead of the curve in comparison to other transit authorities in Massachusetts. And I think, you know, it is something we're excited about. We did a 10-year strategic plan and a 5-year capital plan. We did have to amend it a bit most recently because, you know, we're gonna include some hybrids and actually some fossil fuel vehicles, because we're not totally convinced yet that spending $1 million on a 35-foot Gillig, with the battery concerns we have, the technology advancements still need to continue to get better. So, you know, we can't just jump into $1 million expenditure without being certain, but getting people out of their cars on Cape Cod, reducing the volume of traffic on the roads, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions is our goal. So have great people to learn from and work with, and I look forward to any questions anyone may have. Thanks.
Great. Just to clarify, there's a modern invention in the world of electricity called a circuit breaker. And so when you said Dan blew out a fuse at his house, I'm thinking, how many people out there don't even know what a fuse is anymore? So anyway, I just had to do that. I didn't have to like do a fuse thing. So here's just for people who has electric cars here, because I know we did a. Okay, so just to clarify, level 2 versus a DC fast charge. A level 2 charger, when you plug it in, you'll get maybe 40 to 50 miles an hour when you're charging, something in that range, correct? When I plugged into a DC fast yesterday, because I stopped to do it, I actually, when it started, because the battery was low, it actually started putting in 900 miles in an hour. That's the difference. So the DC fast really is a huge difference between that and the level 2. And Sean, I guess the question I would ask you is, what are the impediments to the DC fast? If one of the 96% that doesn't have an accommodation with, and they're looking at, do I put a level 2 or a DC fast in? Talk about sort of the relative merits.
Yeah, so it really, when you're looking at sizes of charging and right sizing, it's really about dwell time. It's about like we're actively trying to figure this out, especially for fleets. What does that customer segmentation look like? There's a big difference if you have a business and you have a fleet, and you're like a regional transit authority that you have very predictable schedules. You know how the buses are going to run. Probably to the quarter mile how much each one of those buses operate and how they go every each day. Or maybe you're a service organization, you're a contractor or something like that, and you're going around doing different service calls. That's a little bit more sporadic, non-standard. So we've had a lot of fleet customers that come to us and say, oh, you know what, we're going to be trying some things out. We got 3 or 4 F-150 Lightnings, can take 150 kilowatt DC fast charge. That's what we need. We need four DC fast chargers for these vehicles, and we'll plug them in and they'll get charged up. So this is maybe a facility that had a 208 3-phase service. So that would be a customer that if they really wanted to do that, they would require additional transformation, and placing a new pad transformer, have that additional, that secondary voltage to be able to handle a DC fast charge. But then if you really peel back the layers, you start having conversations with the customer about it. It's like, okay, this customer that's really looking to try this out, it's DPW for a town. You take a look at their existing fleet. They drive 25, 30 miles a day, and then they're always garaged to the same place. So although it can take that charge, if you're really can focus on what's that daily range replenishment, how often do you drive, what's kind of the duty cycle of that vehicle, they could get along fine with not even a 40 amp charger. They could even derate that, have some cost savings, and have that timed for overnight to charge, and use AC and get like you said, have that 25 to 30 miles an hour of range replenishment with a AC, lower power AC charger with the existing service sometimes that they have. They wouldn't even need a service upgrade, just getting an electrician involved and pulling that new service.
And the cost difference between putting a DC fast charge versus putting a level 2, it's a huge cost difference?
Oh, it could be order of magnitude difference. The average level 2 charger is anywhere between like $5,000 to maybe $7,500, $8,000, and DC fast chargers, which we consider really like 50 kilowatt and above, they're minimum like $35,000, $40,000 just for the hardware, just for the station itself, not counting the utility side infrastructure that's needed, switch gear, panels, conduit cable, trenching, all that goes towards it.
So Steve, when you look at the planning for the Cape relative to the DC fast versus the level 2, are you guys getting to that level of granularity now?
Yes, we have to really think about both of those use cases and being opportunistic for both of them. So I've kind of separated them out in my mind. DC fast is really important to make sure we have that high-speed charging network for the visitors that are here. Range anxiety is thrown out a lot. For us on Cape Cod, it's a little bit different from Right where we are today, anywhere on Cape Cod is 50 miles. So we're not talking about those big long distances, but it's really important for someone coming here and know that there's more than just 7 places where they can charge, given the influx of visitors. So we kind of think strategically about where those DC fast chargers should be located and where there's opportunities to do this. So level 2 is a little bit different because anytime you're really working on a significant change to a site, whether it be a new build or renovation, you should be thinking about level 2 charging, whether it's installing it or just running the conduit for it and properly sizing your panels, because really that's a good opportunity to think about level 2. So certainly any towns in the room, if there's a permitting process where you're looking at those, certainly an opportunity. We have a model bylaw if anyone's interested locally to look at that, because level 2 is really about those opportunistic opportunities when there's changes, or if again from an economic development perspective, if you want to get some more activity in your downtown area and you want someone to be charging there for a couple hours, then that's a great place for them to go get some coffee and explore the area.
Yeah, that's a great point. For those who are interested on the aviation side, as I said, we've been talking for almost a decade with potential manufacturers of electric airplanes. There's a real energy density problem when you talk about flying batteries through the air. An airplane is really built and designed around the source of energy that's going to drive whatever is propulsing it and what is the source of propulsion. And so in the case of an electric motor, they're relatively simple and they're relatively lightweight. But the batteries are a different issue. And to sort of give you some numbers, the Cape Air fleet, we fly 11-seat airplanes, 9 passengers, 2 pilots. The gross weight of that airplane, as they currently are flying, is about 8,000 pounds. When we look at flying the same amount of people in an electric airplane, it's about 18,000 pounds. So you're basically looking to do the same mission. You're basically looking at flying around 10,000 pounds of battery just to move, maybe 1,200 or 1,300 pounds of people. And so, it's a very different equation relative to energy density. People do say to me, gee, what about this is actually kind of humorous to me. People say, what about the safety factor? The batteries we all know can just ignite and there's a fire hazard. And I'm thinking, it's amazing how the mind works, because do people realize that they're flying around in airplanes that have like thousands of gallons of the most volatile liquid in them, and you're worried about a battery fire? No, I didn't say that. So the challenges we have in aviation, it's not just the physics of battery density and weight to energy, it's also certification, because and I would equate it to sort of certifying, before the mRNA thing, certifying a drug. It takes a long time to do the testing. It takes a long time to go through certification and the legal requirements. That's all about public safety and protecting the public. So in the case of aviation, it's going to take a while before the DOT and the FAA say, they bless us taking passengers and flying them around in electric airplanes. That is for your protection. But I will tell you, it's frustrating as an operator who wants to jump right into this, that it is taking a long time to get the technology built. So should we take some questions?
And I'm curious, as you're saying this, what about NASA? What about our space shuttle that runs on solar, obviously must be recharging batteries? Is any of that technology transferring to aviation?
If what we're talking about is sort of charging the airplane by having solar panels on the wings or something, the amount of energy that is required to actually power an electric motor that's driving an airplane, it's just not even a rounding error. So no, you've got to have a source of really a ton of electricity on the ground. And that's what Katie and her team at the Gateway Airport are really working on, is how do we provide the infrastructure so that when an electric airplane pulls up, we actually can turn that airplane in a reasonable amount of time. In order for the economics of an airplane to work, it has to be in the air, let's say 4 to 6 hours a day, which means we can't plug it in and have it sit around for 2 hours. We need a turn time of a half an hour in order to fly the airplane enough to actually over time pay for the airplane. Another huge driver is this, and this is a big one. When we first started talking to the developers of electric airplanes a few years ago, they were talking about an economic model which had a kilowatt hour being somewhere between 8 and 12 cents. The last time I paid a bill at my house, it was about 31 cents a kilowatt hour. So one of the things we need to do, and I think this is a role of government, is to figure out for all of the planning that's going on, whether it be surface transportation or whether it be aviation or anything, We need to stabilize the predictability of the cost of electricity so that people can actually build economic models around it. And that might be an interesting role for government to play. One of the questions that Sean, I was going to ask you, and you may or may not be your area of expertise, but is all of this stuff going to be paid for by the ratepayer through electric bills, or is there general funding, through the Inflation Reduction Act or other mechanisms, so that we can try to look at ways to stabilize and make predictable the cost of electricity, so we can actually get some of this stuff done?
Yeah, some of the other funds that are out there through the federal government, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money there, and when we were working with developing this plan that we have now, one of the modifications to our proposal, because we have to keep in mind some timing here. We filed our initial proposal in July of 2021. Went through a whole, discovery and process with our regulators, different stakeholders. One of those stakeholders being the Attorney General's office, saying there's a lot of federal money out there, and everything we're trying to do with, not only transportation but also building heating, it can't be a totally like ratepayer, funded, thing through rate recovery, which is traditionally how these programs operate. So, we do have a requirement in our program where, for the electric vehicle charging, customers do have to go after some of that third-party funding that's available, either through other state funds, that are part of that are not paid for through electric rates, as through the general fund in the Commonwealth, and the federal government funds that are coming in here through the things like the infrastructure, and acts and some of those grants that are available. So, one of the things that, switching to just talk about building heating, for example, Massachusetts has a goal, and this again goes back to what Lavelle was talking about earlier, has a goal of electrifying 100 million homes, in the next 3 years, and each one of those homes, they say, in some of the pre-electrification work that's needed, so that's insulation, weatherization, really getting the home airtight, and then putting in the heat pumps and doing that whole system to get it going, can cost, and this is why we have some of the incentives, close to, depending on the home, $30,000 to $40,000. So $30,000 to $40,000 times a million homes, that's a lot of money. So one of the questions that we keep working with our stakeholders and with our regulators and other folks is how are we gonna pay for all this? There needs to be some other influxes of some funds, not only through those traditional mechanisms, but also from federal grants and other programs.
Great, Tom.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Dan. I was wondering myself, the ratepayer impacts as this thing continues to develop. We were the recipient of a $7.5 million VW settlement funds, which helped us purchase a number of 35-foot Gilligs. We've also we're now seeking to, the Lono grant, along with Steamship Authority, is also trying to get some resources in that way. And little things like the Make Ready program saved us a lot of money. And so there are funds out there, and I think that needs to continue to be an emphasis as we move forward.
Thanks. Other questions?
How are the federal and state road taxes collected on electric vehicles?
So this is very interesting. So right now our transportation system is really a use-based system. We have excise tax, we have tolls, we have a gas tax. So as you use your passenger vehicles and as those travel around through the Commonwealth, that's how what pays for a lot of these things. And now and this kind of goes back to Dan's question earlier. And one of the reasons that Eversource is so focused on equity and making sure that we don't forget about the environmental justice communities, those distressed communities, and make sure this electric transition is really available to all customers, is you're at very much a risk of going from that use-based system to now like this investment that is getting spread across, more of a population than like if you just drive a lot, then you're going to end up paying a lot into that infrastructure, through those various mechanisms like the gas tax that's built into the price at the pump. So that's something that Eversource and our regulators, we have to keep a very, very close eye on to make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind. So there are some differences there in how things are structured, to be honest.
And I might add, just kind of looking more broadly across the transportation industry, that's a big question, is how we're going to make that transition from what's been a very traditional gas tax funding of this infrastructure to a new model. And it's really an opportunity to think about where should those burdens lie. Gas tax is inherently regressive, and it puts the most on those who travel more and have less means. So is there a better way to think about how to distribute that and how to think about funding the future of the transportation system? There's some pilots in different states to look at different ways to do that, but certainly an important conversation going forward to think about who should be paying for these overall infrastructure investments in our community.
Yeah, and I think Governor Healy recently created a committee, a transportation funding committee that's digging in to look at all those potential funding sources. But I recall several years ago when there was a pilot program out in the West Coast about vehicle miles traveled, to try to generate revenue by getting a bill from vehicles miles traveled, which, if you really look at it, it makes some sense, but it really was not welcome with open arms. So, but those kind of things have to be considered because the whole paradigm is changing quite a bit.
Yeah, the technology, the great thing about the technologies that exist, it allows you to do some of the funding. Anybody here have an Easy Pass in their car? Okay, so, that can track vehicle miles, and we could start, as Tom just said, we could start actually raising revenue on vehicle miles traveled rather than on a gas tax. So there are mechanisms to do that. I think, I think we have to get a lot more creative about how we manage supply and demand around pricing. Because one of the things we don't do, at least here on the Cape yet, is off-peak pricing on electricity. We absolutely should do that because we should be incentivizing people to use electricity when there's a surplus of electricity and not using it when when demand exceeds supply. So there are a lot of pricing things that we can do. And again, as Sean mentioned, there's a huge look at now the environmental justice side of this, because if there's going to be a burden placed across the economy on making this transition, which is going to cost a lot of money, we have to do it in a way that has appropriate impacts on appropriate parts of our population. So there are not to put Avangrid on the spot, but there are even discussions relative to the wind coming on, and Eversource might be a part of that conversation about maybe where the impacts are. Do we look at low and moderate income neighborhoods and maybe give them rate relief on some of the costs of electricity? There are so many things we can do with the technologies around pricing and measuring, the smart grid, smart meters, that are going to play into all of this and allow us to be creative. The other thing I would say is that this isn't something that, in my opinion, I'm going to do an opinion now, okay? This isn't something that I think we should be asking the question, can we pay for it, and what's going to happen? I think we need to see this as a generational responsibility, such that 75 years from now, our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren will be looking back and thanking us, rather than 75 years from now, them looking back and blaming us. And that's going to require that we appropriately fund and pay for and amortize it in a way that actually is affordable. We can't look at this, even though we're planning around 10 and 20 years, we have to be looking at this and paying for it over 50 or 75 years. The discussion that's going on the bridges now, where is Paul? He's a leader on that. But the discussion that's going on around the bridges, for example, if we look at it as a 20-year investment, it's very different than if we look at it, these last bridges have lasted close to 100 years. So there is a question of how we pay for it, how we amortize it, how we collect the funds in fair and just ways. Yeah.
And going into that, so I live in Kingston, I'm a selector in my town, and we've been talking about, the DPW trucks and getting them to be electric and, going into it and saying, okay, we want to buy 4 trucks this year to get ahead of the electric, but it really is a 20-year investment in getting the electric, but how long is it taking to get, those electric, and putting those into your, be able to agree with it and make that voice heard for that, because you are the voice of your town.
You want to talk to the capital planning side of it?
Well, yeah, I mean, purchasing a 40 passenger or 35 passenger Gillig bus is a little different from a regular vehicle, but there were legitimate supply chain concerns that lasted 2.5, they're talking 2 years and 2.5 years. So we're still trying to figure out, how long it's going to take us and things of that nature. So yeah, that's a legitimate concern.
Sir.
Can you talk a little bit about the vehicle to grid flow? These vehicles, when parked, can actually boost the supply of electricity to the grid. What that looks like economically in terms of modeling it out financially?
Great question.
Sure. Just coming right out of the gate, I think, Eversource is looking into this, and there's, I think we're kind of at a pilot, more of a pilot thing right now. One of the biggest kind of industry-wide kind of barriers that I see from where I sit is, we continue to talk, and I'm talking with a bunch of manufacturers and the electrical distribution industry for switchgear and equipment and everything like that. A big problem right now is, like, as far as I know, still the only UL certified bidirectional EVSE is made by Borg Warner. So Fermata Energy and a few other folks use that, and that's really only certified to use like a Nissan Leaf. And there is some other customers in Massachusetts that it seems like a lot of the activity is really happening again with these Borg Warner chargers with the electric school buses. A lot of municipalities are really going after grants on the EPA Clean School Bus. That's a really big, talking to some of the finances and getting these approvals. That's a really, really big opportunity in the Commonwealth for a lot of municipalities that do own those buses or might consider renegotiating things and their next contract with, if they do use a transportation company or something like that, because some of the towns that I've talked to, they're enrolling these batteries in connected solutions and earning like $10,000 to $12,000 per year per bus by participating in demand response. That starts to add up to some pretty great revenue stacking for customers to enroll in those programs. But I'm actively.
Sean, could you explain what that program actually is?
Oh, sure. So the connected solutions, energy storage programs, and there's a lot of information, on the Mass Save, websites and the Eversource website, for this. There's kind of two things you can do. There's either a daily dispatch or a targeted dispatch, and so they'll look at again those ISO system peaks and look to dispatch those batteries to discharge at times that are advantageous. And then there's incentives to compensate the customer for participating in those programs.
So in effect, the vehicle actually becomes part of the grid relative to storage, and then feeding electricity back into the grid. So instead of building a separate storage, your vehicle actually becomes that. I think the F-150 can be a standby source of electricity in a home. I think they've developed that technology in certain vehicles now.
Yeah, that's still a little bit early days, but there is kind of that partnership with Ford and Sunrun to really create a kind of whole home energy solution with, solar storage. Not storage really, having a battery controller through the EVSE and using the battery on that F-150 Lightning, as that energy storage.
And where is the Cape now as far as smart metering is concerned?
Ooh, I might have to phone a friend. I might have to phone a friend on that one. But I do, for AMI, yeah.
2028 at the latest. So the South will get it last.
So could you explain what that is, and then?
Yeah, so AMI is an advanced metering infrastructure. So this is where Eversource is really looking to invest in now what's coming to be the second generation of advanced metering infrastructure, and that will allow for some really creative rate making, which we were referring to before. Really kind of disaggregating the loads on a customer level, so we'd be able to see on a home basis, you'd be able to see the heat pumps, you'd be able to see the EV chargers. So that would help us extend to our customers more programs of off peak rebates. So instead of having to have one of the reasons that Eversource is really targeting, managed charging programs is because customers operate differently, and even between commercial and residential, even homes operate differently. Homes have different schedules, and there's going to be different needs. Based on that map that we saw earlier, there's a lot of distributed energy resources in southeastern Massachusetts and in western Mass. So managed charging allows us to be a little bit more strategic and a little bit more targeted in some of these programs that we could potentially offer to customers once we get we have a managed charging program that's going to be proposed to our regulators coming very soon for Massachusetts. But rates are a very blunt instrument because it's a rate that's like across the whole state, but there's different situations in different parts of the Commonwealth, and being able to tailor those programs, where it might be more advantageous for customers in a certain part of the state to not charge at home overnight. You have a comfortable state to charge a battery at your home. You have someplace you can charge at work. Charge there. It might even be more economical to do so based on solar generation of some of these resources, and so having instead of we're going to be getting to a place where instead of having to curtail those resources, if we could incentivize customers, be like, okay, go to these places, go to these commercial customers, charge your battery during the day. Then we wouldn't have to potentially, curtail those, some of those distributed energy resources, which we've made such an investment in together.
Right.
Myself to my destination, and then mass transit, where if I'm willing to give up independence, I can go into a box and be transported. Isn't there potentially, with AI and all the other things that are developing, a crossover of the transportation systems that's going to require a readjustment in the head? I just want to get from here to there. As long as it's reliable and safe and convenient, I don't need my own car. We're trying to build roads to accommodate traffic, and the Cape is a perfect example. Do we want to build more roads or just make the pathways we already have more efficient?
I would say just real quick, it's a yes and. I don't want you to take away here that me thinking electrifying every vehicle is the answer. That's not the answer. There's certainly the multimodal aspect, which I'm going to hand it over to the expert.
Well, that's a good question, and I tried to mention that earlier when I said we did a very serious marketing effort to get folks out of their cars and into public transportation. We have what is known as the Smart Dart, the app-based service that I mentioned, and we also have a Dart service where you call 24 hours ahead of time. We will come and get you and take you where you need to go. We average about 600 people a day that use that. And then our fixed route, which is going through 7 on the hour, through 7 fixed route services throughout 15 towns, we're constantly trying new things. It's free fare now, free fare for seniors and disabled every day of the week. We've got discounts for other folks that we need to get into public transportation. So you're right that we do need to get people out of their cars because things aren't moving as fast as I originally anticipated. And I think the numbers were already referenced here earlier that, that they're just not happening. And that's why we amended our strategic plan to actually purchase some hybrids and some fossil fuel vehicles. So it's a great question and one that we consider all the time. So we're going to continue to try to work on it and make the best of it.
And if I could just add, certainly industry-wide, we're hearing a lot about this, and maybe this sets up a future conversation, but thinking about our mobility needs as a service rather than ownership model. Certainly there's good examples elsewhere where people are able to rely on transit for almost all trips, but then there's an electric car share model to help with other trips. So there's certainly some great things that we could pilot here to really think about if we reimagine how people get around, what are the best ways to do it and the most carbon-sensitive ways to do it.
Yeah, a couple things I'd add too is that there's a lot of kind of interesting vehicles that are coming on the scene. Like, I'm not suggesting that people commute on electric skateboards, but there are electric bicycles, which make it a lot more practical to commute. Everybody says, well, this is a cold weather place. Well, I was over in Copenhagen last year, and you get run over by bicycles in Copenhagen, even in the middle of winter. So, part of it is adjusting our expectations and our habits, because the bicycle or the electric bike is a great way to get around, and it is a lot less impactful. The other thing I would say is, and I just throw this out there, the rideshare stuff, and I don't know if it's a competitive thing to the RTA or not, but the rideshare, the Uber and the Lyft and that kind of stuff, that is an interesting technology, because it really is a technology solution. And we should be requiring that those vehicles be electric. I mean, one of the things that we could do is we could start saying, we could start as policymakers in the towns, say, if we're going to go down this road, we need to make sure we're doing it in environmental ways and in ways that are consistent with the environmental justice community as well.
Well, our new Smart Dot that I mentioned that we're unveiling on June 22nd in all 15 towns is Uber and Lyft, only it's $3 per transportation trip with safe drivers, trained drivers that are safe in the vehicle. So there's a lot of advantages, but it is very comparable to Uber and Lyft.
So those are small capacity vehicles?
Yeah. But we're going to use some of our DOT vehicles, which can carry as many as 16 people, but smaller passenger new DOT vehicles, 4 or 5, 6.
So if you imagine the flexibility...
And of course, wheelchair accessible.
Yeah, and so you imagine the flexibility of a ride share, but without the environmental impact, and without the need for everybody to have an automobile or a vehicle in their driveway or garage. Go ahead, follow up.
So in that model, how do you shrink the wait time? I mean, I realize that I'm talking about impatient human beings, but that's part of the change, I think. Either we have to realize that the wait time isn't as long as we think it is, or you have to actually improve and shrink the time it takes for me to decide I need to go out there and I need to go down the street 4 miles. If I make that decision now, will the car be out there when I walk out?
That's another great question, one that we have that conversation daily, I would say. And so we've had a pilot program in Barnstable and Yarmouth for the last 2 or 3 years, so we've learned a lot about the needs and how many vehicle deployment and all of that stuff. We then expanded to Dennis and Sandwich and Falmouth, and we've learned more about what kind of needs we're going to have in terms of vehicles and things of that nature. Now we're going to all 15 towns, but they've assured me that they will be able to accommodate no longer than a 30-minute wait for a vehicle. So, there's other options too. We have a DOT service, so we have great people at our operations center that actually know a lot of the people that schedule these rides, these 600 a day, and we're trying to encourage them into different services. We don't want to have an adverse impact on our fixed route service. We want our fixed route to be robust. But this is meant for short hauls. We've learned a lot about it. Our team has learned a lot about it. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm confident the waits won't be very long, because we're studying some of the data now and seeing when people are dropping off and not waiting. And we don't want that. We want to be as efficient as we can. So we're learning as we go, but we're confident we're going to be successful.
I think the folks at the Cape Air table back there, a huge shout out to Cape Air, by the way, a leader in the industry in environmental sustainability in the airline industry. But what they're thinking is, one of the ways to do the wait time thing is limit the size of the vehicle and increase the frequency. So just as an example, when we started our Caribbean operation in 1998, we were competing with big airplanes, American Airlines. They did 4 flights a day from San Juan to St. Thomas. We came down there with airplanes with 25% of the capacity, and we put hourly service in. And what won it was, and a customer going out to the airport knew that they would be getting on an airplane within 15, 20 minutes, a half an hour, as opposed to waiting for several hours. So I completely agree. The challenge for public transportation is frequency and convenience, and not waiting in long lines. And the thing is, with the technologies that are there now, this is all achievable. And it's achievable in environmentally sustainable ways, thanks to the planning folks and the implementers and the transportation wonks that are up here. Other questions real quick? I don't know how we're doing on time. We're good on time? We're done? What does this mean when somebody does it? I think in like revolutionary French, in France, that would have been a really bad thing. It's like, I'm out. Anyway, this was a lot of fun. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you guys.